Hello, my friends. Sorry I'm late. It's the Tuesday episode of Stand Up, and joining me today is constitutional law professor Eric Segall to talk about Clarence Thomas's alleged corruption, federal court justices ruling on the abortion pill, and the history of why the President of the United States can decide not to enforce a judge's ruling. I learned a lot about history, recent history, and less recent history on today's episode of Stand Up from Eric Segall. Very happy to have him. I was driving back with my family late last night after a college visit, looked like the final one to Ithaca College, and we had a great time, but got home real late. Sat down with Segall, but was not able to turn it around. Just wasn't able to turn it around until late this morning. So I've got it up. I hope you enjoy it, and we will get back to the regular format tonight. I'll be talking with Tim Wise later on today, another one of your favorites about all things Tennessee, because he is from Tennessee. Of course, that's where that shooting was. That's where the controversy and drama around expelling actual legislators from the state house, 2 black legislators, and now they're back in. At least one of them is. The other one is going to be brought back in, restored, I think today or tomorrow, and it's just a ridiculous, stupid move by Republicans who expelled these 2 legislators who did everything they could to bring attention to the issue of gun violence in Tennessee. They were kicked out of the state house, out of their jobs by Republicans. Then they became national heroes to many of us. Then they raised tons of money from many of us. And now they're back in. It's unbelievable. The Republicans ran up to their own goal, kicked the ball into their own goal, and lost. What an epic failure in Tennessee. I'll be talking with Tim Wise about what happened there and more. That is coming up tomorrow. But right now, I've got Eric Segall joining me. And we started by talking a little bit about the college visit and the ethics around something that I did while there. I'd love to know what you think. I want to leave it in there because I want to know what you think. As always, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. That is my email. Tell me what I can do better. Tell me how to make our show better. And I hope that you will subscribe to it if you haven't already at standupwithpete.com, patreon.com/Pete Dominic, so I can continue to have these conversations with brilliant new people all the time, by the way, every day. But right now, it's one of our all-time favorites, the always reliable, the great professor from Georgia State University, whose podcast you have to listen to, Supreme Myths, especially this week on religion. Get his book, Supreme Myths, Originalism as Faith. Follow him on social medias, Twitter and TikTok. And here we go. The Legal Eagle, Eric Segall. There's nobody I wanted to talk to more than my friend Eric Segall. I drove a long way today. Back from my hometown, we went and visited the college that Ava may go to, Ithaca College, and then we drove home, and all I could think about was how badly I wanted to talk to you. Thank you for saying yes on this late.
By the way, my high school girlfriend, who was a year older than me, went to Ithaca College. Small world.
It's about to be...
No one cares about that, but nevertheless, small world.
I went in and talked to the dean, the assistant dean of the school that she's going to be, which is the School of Communications, TV, radio, etc. Yeah. So I introduced myself and I was like, listen, man, my daughter has been admitted here and she may go here. And I am this guy and I've done this and this and this. And he goes, he let you see him go, get all excited. And he goes, why don't you come into my office? I was like, motherfucker, it's working. And I go, I'd love to talk to you about coming up and doing maybe like a 5-week thing or just even one lecture or something, because I've worked in corporate media, I've worked in independent media, I've worked in TV, I've worked in radio, podcast, all of it, you name it. And obviously comedy. And he was just over the moon. So do you think that was an ethical thing to do to get a little bit of extra scratch from this university? Like, I'll volunteer in their lower tuition.
100%.
Yeah.
Because here's the and I'm going to give you the exact reason why. Before I give you the exact reason why,
can I tell you why? Can I tell you why I thought it was ethical?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you why it was definitely ethical. Pete, if they did not take your daughter and said sorry, whatever, that she didn't get admitted, and they asked you to come do the lecture, you would do it anyway. And that's why it's not ethical. I know you would. Unless your daughter asked you not to.
I've done it at many colleges. I've been a visiting, speaker at colleges talking on media and comedy in media and all kinds of different things.
Pete, if you had a friend's kid at Ithaca who your friend said, my kid's in trouble, go help the kid out. And you go to the college campus, you help them move their stuff or whatever. and you saw this guy walking in and you noticed, oh, School of Communication. You might walk in there and say, hey, I was on campus, helping out a student of yours. And by the way, I've done this, I've done that. I'd love to come in. You do that anyway. So it's not a quid pro quo. It's not if you offer them something you wouldn't normally do, that's a different conversation.
Well, you always tell me the truth. At one point I told you I was thinking about running for office, and you said, Pete, Pete, I think you'd be great at that. Pete, I think you'd win, but it's not for you. And I said, what do you mean? I'm tailor-made for it. I would love to do it. He goes, no, because you would have to lie, and you're not good at lying. You can't lie. That's what I remember where I was standing in the corner of my yard, and you said, you can't lie. And I felt like that was one of the most thoughtful things anybody had ever said to me. Because you were being honest as a friend with what you thought I should do, and then you told me specifically that, and I thought, what an ethical, moral, thoughtful thing.
I've had practice in that because when I first met Lynn, when she and I first met, she was 37 years old. I thought she'd be a great politician. Don't you think? I mean, Lynn would. Oh well,
she's. I mean, I know her well enough to know that she's super, super smart.
Yeah, she talks well. She teaches. She was a communication studies major. She teaches communication, all that stuff. But, I mean, she never had an interest. But then when I thought about it longer, we had a conversation. I realized, also after talking to Judge Posner,
there it is. Drink.
All politicians lie. It's part of the job. You have to be comfortable with lying. I don't think you are. I think you are. I mean, there's Lynn. I think you both are comfortable with the truth as you see it, as the best you can see it. And if you're not comfortable with lying, going into politics is a terrible.
Which brings up a question about you. How is the construction for the new carriage house going? Guest house? How's that going?
I thought you were going to ask me a different question, which is even more painful. It is good. So, okay, let's. I
just want to see if you're going to lie. Who cares? Let's move on. All right, let's get to it.
Well, no. The loyal ones, your loyal audience deserves 1 minute on this. So, Pete and his audience has teased me for 10 years about having a guest house. I never had a guest house. I had a termite-ridden, rat-infested shack. However, now we're getting a guest house, and I admit it. See? I tell the truth.
There you go. See?
It's going fine.
There you go. All right. I'm very excited to stay in it for a long period of time until it gets weird.
And if we don't rent it, you'll be invited anytime.
Until it gets weird. Hey, Eric, he's been out there for almost a month. He's like, always, I love Atlanta. He doesn't do anything, and we're feeding him as well, Eric. Okay.
By the way, these days, there's a big part. I mean, I just had this conversation with a law professor friend of mine today on my podcast. Retirement, going to a guest house, staying there, and never coming out. It all feels kind of good right now. But go ahead. Let's do this.
All right. Well, I want to hear more about your feelings with where you're at and how other people can relate to them. We should do a whole hour just on that.
Next week, retirement.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay,
yep.
But let's get to the issues at hand. There's a couple of them. One is really consequential in terms of what the Affordable Care Act currently protects for millions of Americans and coverage that millions of Americans could lose. So it's really important. So I'm glad you're here. We got to talk about that. You made me aware of that. But you have written and been speaking about and talking about Justice Clarence Thomas for years. You have a blog. You have a blog post at Dorf on Law, Justice Thomas's greatest hits from last May. I mean, you really are an expert on this guy. Are you surprised that he is partying and vacationing with a billionaire on his plane and his yacht and his resorts?
So let's try to give a bigger picture.
And why does that matter, by the way?
Say it again.
And why does that matter, I think, maybe most important.
So Clarence Thomas is our most senior Supreme Court justice. If he serves 4 more years, he will be the longest serving justice in American history. He is our second black justice, right? And he is the carrier of the torch of originalism. So whereas I'd like to remind people that although I study the Supreme Court for a living, our world and our country has far more problems. We have climate change. We have LGBTQ discrimination. We have lower court judges going fucking crazy all over the country. But this is a major historical figure, Pete. I mean, this is a guy who I think will become the longest serving Supreme Court justice. And without him, I don't think originalism would be as terrible a label and as misleading as it is. So he's a really important American figure. He will be the subject of history books 70 years from now in ways that Justice Souter or Justice Breyer or Justice Barrett won't be.
And his confirmation hearing was something that a kid in high school who paid no attention to politics, much less the Supreme Court, all of a sudden turned on the TV is like, why are they talking about pubic hairs on a Coke can? Who is this guy? I mean, I feel like his confirmation hearing alone is something that most Americans of a certain age remember living through.
Well, there are so many things about that are relevant today, if you don't mind. So let's go back to 1991 when his confirmation hearing. Everybody remembers that. The non-lawyer, general informed public remembers that as being about Anita Hill and allegations of sexual harassment, and then Thomas saying, and this was such a clue, this is a high-tech lynching. All right, let's just talk about that phrase for 1 second to show how evil this man is. Okay, because I believe he's evil. I believe he's Trumpian evil, and I've been saying that he's not as bad as Trump as a person, although I think he's borderline. I think he's right. So the difference is he grew up in abject poverty with people burning crosses on their lawns, and Donald Trump grew up in a gold tower. So I think we can make different distinctions based on that. But in any event, high-tech lynching. All right, if Thomas had not been confirmed, let's say it had worked. Let's say it had worked, and let's say Anita Hill was lying. I don't believe she was. Let's say she was. Okay, it's not a high-tech lynching, Pete, because you know what happens to him? He goes back to be on the second highest court in the land with life tenure. So do not equate yourself going back to the D.C. Court of Appeals for life and having people stand up when you walk into a room and getting free trips all over the country to go to law schools to lynchings. Let's not do that, okay? So that was the first thing. The second thing is I'm not going to discuss Anita Hill anymore because we don't know, and we don't know, so I'm not going to. We don't know what? We don't. We can't say for sure that she was telling the truth, and we can't say for sure she was.
Okay, all right.
I want to say my opinion of Clarence Thomas had nothing and has nothing to do with Anita Hill because we don't need Anita Hill to come to the conclusions we need to.
My thing with that, even when I was like, how old was I when that happened? I was like, why would that lady lie?
Right. Well, especially when there were two ladies. So another thing about that confirmation that is relevant today
is Joe Biden had something to do with it, and now he's president.
There were two women who were there to corroborate Anita Hill's testimony, and as chair of the committee, Joe Biden wouldn't let either one testify.
Biden wouldn't let either of them testify.
There are many theories about why. The most popular one is Thomas was backed for the Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court by a senator from Missouri. I want to say Danforth, but don't hold me to that. But I'm pretty sure it was Senator Danforth. And he and Thomas were best friends. And I think in 1991, there was much more bipartisanship than there is today. And I think Biden probably bowed to the pressure of Senate Republicans not to have people come in and confirm Anita Hill.
Not to have you're fading out there. Right there.
Sorry. I believe that Biden probably bowed to pressure from Republicans who were friends of his, who he worked with for a long time, and sometimes in bipartisan ways, to not have the story corroborated.
Right. That's so crazy because there's a certain amount of responsibility that the President Biden bears for the current Supreme Court makeup.
Yes, I think that's correct. All right. But when I was watching that in real time, this is what got me. Several senators asked him, did he ever discuss, debate, argue, Roe versus Wade? Thomas graduated law school in 1973, 2 or 3, but Roe was 1973. So he had 83, 93. He had 18 years to talk about Roe. He says he never did. He was head of the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a pretty big post. It was incredible to me that he had never debated it. He could have said, like everybody else says, that case may come before me, so I'm not going to answer your questions. That's what everybody says. He didn't say that. He said I never debated. Well, Erwin Chemerinsky, my friend, found the sources, and 2 Republican officials have written books, like autobiographies and stuff like that, or were quoted in autobiographies saying they talked about Roe with Thomas, and he didn't like the opinion. Why lie? Why lie? I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why he lied. In that moment, he lied. We know he lied. Now, he might have forgotten, to be fair, but he didn't. He lied. Because lying to him comes very naturally. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Well, lying to Clarence Thomas comes very natural. And again, I feel like you've gotten into the hits of Clarence Thomas without introducing it. But there are so many things to say.
So many things. Let's just do this one.
But I mean,
no, hold on. I want to do one because there's one that made the media rounds for like a day and then it went away.
Sure.
And I don't understand why it went away because I consider this to be an impeachable offense.
Let's go.
Pete, it's 2000, and it's November, December 2000. And Florida, the election is going to turn on Florida. Whoever wins Florida wins the election. And there's Court of Appeals cases and district court cases and state Supreme Court cases. And, we're all in chaos. It's all going crazy. And eventually the court shuts down the recount and says Florida cannot count the ballots anymore, which meant Bush won the election. Now, Bush might have won anyway, but we'll never know because the voting was stopped. In that very same period of time, Ginny Thomas was being paid, making money, for recommending people to work in the Bush administration that hadn't yet been voted in.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
Because she had a financial incentive. She become a richer person, meaning the Thomas family becomes richer the more people she gets to recommend for the Bush administration. She's like, a headline kind of thing. And he didn't recuse himself in that case. And he had to recuse himself in Bush versus Gore since his wife's livelihood was affected by it. Now, that's not now, when a judge's personal finances are affected by the case before them, they simply have to recuse.
Right.
And if your wife's finances are directly affected by the case, you have to do it.
Your spouse.
Say again?
Your spouse. I mean, you said wife, but I mean, it could be.
So that is just an unbelievable thing. Like he never should. And if he does, if he does the right thing and recuses in Bush versus Gore, then it's 4-4. The lower court decision stays. The recount happens, and no one knows who wins. So that is really. I
mean, he had a direct financial incentive in George W. Bush being president, and he did not recuse himself. You write about this in this piece at Dorf on Law. But what about other ethics violations? This is not.
Here's a fun one. I have a fun one for you.
Oh, let's do a fun one, folks.
So his wife, he reported. Supreme Court judges have to report their spouse's income, and he reported Ginny's income for a while, and then he stopped. And he stopped for like 12 years or so, 10 years, 8 years, at least 7 or 8 years, maybe longer. Then he was caught. So then and of course, a lot of the money came from Heritage, which is basically the Federalist Society. The overlap,
the right-wing think tank.
No, but it's more than that. It's in coordination with the Federalist Society. And when he was caught, he just made a statement saying, it was an inadvertent error. But here's the funny thing: he reported her income for years before that. So he reported it year after year after year after year, and then he stopped. And every year he got the same form which says report your wife's income, and he didn't do it. There is no excuse for that. There's just none. Plus, he's a Supreme Court judge. What about ignorance of the law is no excuse? I mean, so that's a pretty terrible.
I mean, there's no you can't plead ignorance of a law that you'd been abiding by for a long time.
Yes. There's so much like this. Okay, let's get serious for one minute.
I followed that law many times. I didn't realize it was a law.
Let's get to a serious point. And I'm a little uncomfortable talking about this, but I think it has to be said. In a case called Fisher versus Texas, which was an affirmative action case from the late 2000s, from 2018, 16. It was argued twice in the Supreme Court. In one of his opinions in those cases, Pete, I've told you this before, he said that Yale Law School in 1973 or 201 was a worse place for blacks than the segregated South. Now, I want to say where crosses were burned on lawns in Georgia. When Justice Thomas grew up in Georgia, it wasn't just segregated schools. It was segregated pools, segregated parks, segregated jails, segregated phone booths, if your audience knows what those are, segregated everything, okay? Everything. Now, I totally credit Justice Thomas feeling like he was treated badly at Yale. He said they were condescending to him. I'm sure they were, and I'm sure that was terrible. I am not in any way suggesting it was not an awful experience for Justice Thomas. But to compare his Yale Law School years in New Haven, Connecticut, at the most prestigious law school in the United States, with people in the South in 1960 who, or even worse, 1940s, who were lynched, who were treated as fifth-class citizens, etc., it's sick. It's deranged. It's deranged. It's absolutely deranged. And he said it a number of times, so much so that he equated the University of Texas administrators who had come up with this affirmative action plan, which was under attack. He equated their motivations with the motivations of slaveholders and segregationists. It's what he wrote. Now, those people at the University of Texas are not any different, really, than the people at the University of Georgia or Georgia State when we talk about DEI and affirmative action. I might be wrong about affirmative action all the way down. Maybe it's the worst thing that society's ever done. Maybe it's not the way to get past discrimination. I think it is, or maybe it's not. But Pete, I am not a slaveholder. I am not a segregationist.
Right.
And my motives are for a more just society, not a more unjust society.
Yeah. I mean, you've talked a lot about, by the way, this issue before the Supreme Court. It came up on a show the other day, and I commented on it and felt like a jackass because I wasn't quite sure. But the future of affirmative action, this case is being decided, and you think they will strike. You think they'll strike it down. It's been argued already, right? Is specifically about admission into college, and right, it's not about employment. It's specifically about that. And you've spoken to just your own experience at Georgia State and what that would mean, how colleges would have to work harder to get more creative to make sure that people from all backgrounds would be the incoming students and make up a wide variety because that's what they cherish and that's what they need, right? Like, do I have that all right?
No, my law school sits 2 blocks from what used to be called the Heart of Atlanta Motel. It's now a Sheraton. In 1964, when I was 6 years old, no comments, no jokes. When I was 6 years old in 1964, this hotel went to the Supreme Court and said, we don't want blacks here, and we want the right to exclude them. The Supreme Court said no, of course, but that's what they did, and that's what they wanted. And that hotel sits 2 blocks from my law school. Right. And in my lifetime.
A lot of black students at Georgia State. I don't know about the law school, but probably.
If we can't recognize the evil of what was happening in America between really 1890 and 1964, or at least, in terms of organized, legitimated, formal racism, and try to do something about that. If we can't do that, but who the fuck are we? And here's the other thing, of course, everyone knows. And
so,
of course,
well said. No, well said.
And of course, Justice Thomas got into Yale through affirmative action. So the irony is the strongest opponent of affirmative action around
benefited
only has the loudspeaker to voice those views because he was the product of
brutal.
It's almost too much to bear. It is almost. And by the way, we haven't even started talking about his wife. So I don't really want to do.
Well, let me just answer me just this one. You worked in the government.
Yes.
And you know a lot of people who work in the government. And I know a lot of people who work in the government. And they're very, very careful about what they accept in terms of any value, monetary, a ride, entrance into, admission to, et cetera, and so on. Because why get caught up in that? Those are ethics violations. There's legal laws against many of them. And so I'm talking about like a House member or somebody who works in the Department of Transportation or Fish and Wildlife. This guy's one of 9 Supreme Court justices. He's being photographed in his dumb vest with his dumb wife at some billionaire's Nazi lair. I may have embellished some things. It's mind blowing that he would do this.
What people have heard about is the $500,000 value of the yacht trips, the private resort in the Adirondacks or in upstate New York.
Private planes, private resorts, private boats.
But wait a minute, it's more than that. He accepted a signed Bible by Frederick Douglass valued at around $18,000.
Holy shit.
But Pete, I want you to give me a minute here. I want to talk to people about Frederick Douglass and Justice Thomas.
Oh.
So I wrote an article once that was called it's a long time ago too, called Justice Thomas, Dazed or Confused, I think it was or Confusion or Bad Faith or something like that. Because this is about, so Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist, black abolitionist in the 19th century, fought against slavery, one of America's great heroes. Thomas loves quoting and has quoted him in cases as saying, Frederick Douglass has this quote, all we want from the white man is to let us alone. Leave us alone. Just get out of our way, let us live our lives, and leave us alone. I'm paraphrasing, of course. That's pretty much what Douglass said. And Thomas uses that to argue against affirmative action, saying the original meaning of the, back then even, all black people wanted was the right to be free and equal. They weren't wanting anything special. That's a lie. It's all a lie. Frederick Douglass said those words in the context of saying to people, don't get in the way of blacks doing legal things. Get out of our way when we try to do legal things. Frederick Douglass spent most of his life, after slavery was abolished, talking about, and this is almost a direct quote, never in human history have people who were so, I forget the word he used, but it wasn't enslaved, but it was some word like that, have been set free with so little. And he was very upset about the 4 acres of land. He thought the federal government didn't do anything near enough. So what Thomas is doing is taking 3 sentences out of a man's life work, taking them out of context and lying about what they mean. And wait, it gets worse. Not just me, but other scholars have pointed this out. His law clerks know this. They know this quote of Frederick Douglass is wrong and not reflective of what Thomas, and he does it anyway. See, there's a person who refuses to admit they're wrong, who refuses to learn, and is willing to lie because he is quoting. So that Bible worth $18,000, the reason he was given a Frederick Douglass Bible is because of everything I'm telling you he says about Frederick Douglass,
right. And
virtually none of it is true.
Wow.
It's just crazy. It's really crazy.
I'm glad you told me that. I'm going to read what you and others have.
It's in the Wake Forest Law Review online, and it gives exactly what Thomas says, exactly what Douglass says, and shows how he totally misinterpreted.
Who wrote that?
A guy named Segall, Eric Segall.
Oh, that's where you wrote that.
Yes, Wake Forest.
I was Googling while you were saying I couldn't find it.
Okay, one last thing about Thomas, I guess. I think so. So when the first Obama case was argued back in 2012, Obamacare case was argued in 2012, the left spent enormous energy, famous people on the left, saying Justice Thomas had to recuse himself because Ginny had, in fact, lobbied against the Affordable Care Act. And I wrote several pieces, saying, no, he doesn't. He does not have to recuse himself. Unless we can show there's a direct financial benefit to Ginny, and there really wasn't. If anything, she makes more money if it stays a law, since she can lobby against it some more.
I'm vaguely remembering your opinion because I feel like you really got abused for that.
What I said was Justice Kagan had to recuse herself.
Right. That's right.
Because she was the Solicitor General of the United States, and her deputy argued the case in the lower courts.
Right.
But that's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is I went out. You're right. The left killed me, as is often the case with me. The left killed me for that opinion that Thomas should not recuse and Kagan should. So I'm one, and one of the reasons I said that, Pete, was Mike Dorff, for example, who you know and I blog with. Mike clerked for a guy named Judge Reinhardt, who was the liberal lion in the Ninth Circuit.
Right.
And he was one of the most famous lower court judges, one of the top 10. His wife worked for the ACLU his entire life. He didn't have to recuse himself in ACLU cases just because, he would have to for the very office she was in. But he didn't have to recuse himself in those kinds of cases because we don't want to have judges recuse themselves because of their spouse's activity, because that will hurt women, first of all. And second of all, people can separate it out. Okay. So I've defended Thomas on that score. What Ginny did in 2021, by getting directly involved in trying to get the Arizona legislature to overturn the results of an election is a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Whole different ballgame. Especially when the validity of and things surrounding the 2020 election go to the Supreme Court and Thomas doesn't recuse, and his wife is out there behind the scenes telling politicians overturn the election. I'm going to say something. You don't think he gets laid more if the election is overturned?
That was beneath you.
Do you want to bleep that out?
No, I want to say that I take credit for. I texted you to say that joke. No, I think your crass, low humor is absolutely 100% true about happy wife, happy life. Like, just the bottom line, like, he loves his wife and he wants to make her happy.
And that's not enough to recuse. But she's directly trying to undermine the elections of the United States.
Yeah.
okay, he's got to tell her to stand down, or I quit. Either you stand down, or I quit the court. Right. We can't have both.
No doubt about it. No doubt. But he didn't recuse himself.
And she didn't stand down.
When it came to the Supreme Court.
Yes, he did not. He never does. Almost never.
Okay. So, Clarence,
I want to say, Pete,
you still haven't really answered, though, like, is there precedent for other Supreme Court justices taking even the smallest favor?
So in fact, Scalia and Thomas went to Koch brothers retreats in the mid-2000s, not to give a talk or talk about civics or something, just so Connor went all over the country her entire career talking about civics, and she did it very nicely, frankly, very well. And kudos
going
to her.
Around speaking is
different.
Yeah, taking speaking gigs, you get a good hotel. They pay for your. Can you make money on those speaking gigs?
You can get expenses. I don't believe you can get honorarium, but let's go back. In the Supreme Court case, anything is possible because Justice Roberts has said there is no binding ethics code in the Supreme Court.
Say that again. There's no what?
And so in 2012, when the left was arguing for Thomas to recuse, and I, the only liberal in the country, arguing for Kagan to recuse. No, it's true. I know. Justice Roberts that year used his end of the year report to talk about why there wasn't a binding ethics code on SCOTUS.
Why there was not a binding ethics code for the Supreme Court.
And his answer was basically because we're the Supreme Court.
Because we're the Supreme Court?
We're the only ones Congress can't tell us what kind of ethics code to have. Now, my point about this is, even if Roberts is right about that, which I don't think he is, there is something Congress could unequivocally do that would be definitely constitutional, which is to say, okay, Supreme Court, you wanted $7 billion for the federal judiciary for their budget next year. You can have $7 million if you have a binding ethics code. If you don't have a binding ethics code, you get $500,000. Good luck to you. And we know Congress can do that, Pete, because in 1800, for those originalists out there, in 1801, Thomas Jefferson and the brand new anti-federalist Congress closed the Supreme Court for a year, sent them home, said you can't work, goodbye. They turned the candles off. They really did. Now, I'm not saying this Congress can do that, but Congress does have the money and the Supreme Court has none. And Congress only has to minimally fund the Supreme Court. So instead of having 4 law clerks, they can get 1 law clerk. Instead of having a big marble building in Washington,
there are things they can do.
Yes, and they should, because the only 9 judges in the United States of America that don't have a binding ethics code are the 9 judges.
That's the most important point. Judges at every other level have binding ethics court, but not binding ethics rules, but not at the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Jeez, Louise.
So I want to leave this Thomas chapter though with one more thought that I want to get out.
All right.
People have come on and off your show and every show on that used to be on XM and has podcasts and wherever people are talking politics. And they call presidents, governors, senators, mayors, local town reps, all kinds of names, liars, scallywag.
Nobody calls anybody a scallywag. I didn't even know what century you're on.
My point is,
you were making generational references, I think.
There has traditionally been, I like the word scallywag. I like the way it sounds.
Lousy losers.
I got to tell you this. In a different, if we were on a pirate ship,
a fucking pirate or a constitutional law scholar?
If we were in the land of pirates, you would be a scallywag.
Believe me, you know what you would be?
What would I be?
An elder.
That's true. Fuck you. So this sounds making a really serious point. So here's the thing. In my profession, constitutional law professor, 200 law schools, plus pundits, plus everybody else, we have to play by different rules when we criticize Supreme Court justices. People always say, you can criticize what they wrote, obviously. You can criticize their opinions. You can criticize the court structure, but don't criticize the people on the court. Respect the office.
Preposterous.
And I find that absolutely absurd and stupid, and I think I've gone a long way in helping people change it.
You have made a career of it, and it's been wonderful. You've slowly taken their robes off.
So Justice Thomas is a bad man, period. He's a bad man for whatever reason. Now, he's not a totally bad man. He has a lot of good qualities, Pete. He treats the staff better than any other Supreme Court justice. This is well known. I give him a lot of points for that. He does talk to normal, common Americans all the time. He doesn't have public errors. Apparently, he has private errors we didn't know about.
What does that mean?
In public, he's very man of the earth. We didn't know he had these $500,000 trips and all this stuff. But my real point is, I want us to be able, not me, I want the world to be able to discuss Supreme Court justices the same way we talk about presidents and governors and senators. And there's a real reluctance to do that. And I think that's wrong. If anything, Pete, it should be the opposite. Because the president only gets 2 terms.
Yeah.
Most governors get term limit out. We can vote for senator. We can vote for House of Representatives. We cannot vote for Supreme Court justices. What other ways do we have to show the true light of these people to the American people? Yet, just last year, I did a presentation on Justice Roberts where I had a lot of evidence about his hubris. And some of that evidence was 2 different opinions where he basically lied. He didn't basically lie, he lied. And the audience of all law professors was with me until I used the word lie.
Oh, really?
And then
they could not allow for that, huh?
Not allowed. Not allowed.
Weird. You guys are weird. Not you. They are. Okay. 2 more really important issues. Of course, this, you said before we hit record, because I think because you don't quite, well, because you said you didn't want to get in the weeds, what's going on with the abortion pill, and this one judge says it's a pill approved by the FDA is no longer legal. Another judge says, yes, it is. And
no, wait. The second judge didn't just say that. The second judge said it's legal and the FDA can't change its policies about it. So one judge is saying you have to change your policies. The other judge is saying you're not allowed to. Is there any kind of precedent for a judge or a court at any level, like going to the FDA or the CDC or NOAA and saying, to their science, their approvals of, in this case, of drugs or food regulations, and saying you're wrong? They're not, I don't think the judge is saying you're wrong. I think the judge is saying, well, first of all, it's hard
to know what. To be fair, I don't know. I didn't read anything about it. It's just
the opinion is abominably bad in every way. It doesn't make any sense.
All right.
But so Steve Vladeck is currently the leading expert, I think, in the United States.
Okay, so read Vladeck on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, but he said a few days ago, I haven't checked to see if he's updated this, but he said a few days ago that he didn't know of a situation where one district judge said in 7 days, they have 7 days to appeal. But assuming that the appeal is not allowed, then one judge is saying you must take it off the market, and the other judge is saying, and until you go through the right procedural hoops, the other judge is saying you're not allowed to take it off the market. And then what is the government supposed to do?
Are they both circuit court judges?
No, they're both district court, the trial courts.
So they're both at the same level.
Yes.
So what is? I mean, does this happen? Does this happen?
How does it happen?
Does this ever happen?
No, not that I know of. And Vladeck said he didn't know it ever happened that way before. Now, don't get me wrong. Courts in different states disagree all the time. That's called the circuits or different. We have 12 circuits, more or less. And when circuit court opinions disagree, those cases go to the Supreme Court. What Steve is saying is that, and I'm saying is, I don't remember a time when 2 trial court judges issued conflicting orders to the federal government on the same day. And this is what's weird about it. No one knows how the Washington judge knew when the Texas judge was going to do this. We all knew he was going to do it. We just didn't know when. And somehow both opinions came out the same day. So all I can think of is the Washington judge had it. Okay, this is a guess. This is what Dan Le Batard calls reckless speculation. But all I can think of is the Washington judge was waiting for the Texas judge to issue his opinion, and then he issues opinions 3 hours later.
That's how quickly the
same day. It was the same day.
I don't understand how anything works. But this is, where are we going? The conservative legal movement has long had 2 key goals, writes your friend Adam Liptak at the New York Times: to limit access to abortion, to restrict the authority of administrative agencies. The decision last week by a federal judge in Texas invalidating the FDA's approval 23 years ago, Segall,
I know. It's unbelievable. It's insane.
Of the abortion drug mifepristone, I think that's pronounced right, checked both of the boxes, limited to access to abortion and authority of administrative agencies. Woo!
Look, this is not complicated. I wrote about it last week. I wrote about Federalist Society judges acting badly. That's what I wrote. And on Dorfman Law. And I have all kinds of, I have 5 examples of lower court judges acting badly. He's not this. I didn't use this guy's ruling as an example, but it's another example of this. It makes no sense. It's been on the market for 23 years. It makes this case makes no sense. Most conservatives are saying it makes no sense. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Dorf has his own piece just posted today. Judge Kaczmarek's tortured readings.
Yes. And tortured is a kind way of saying that. No, it's true. Actually, the other, sorry to go back to Thomas, but it turns out that the guy who has been flying him around the world on private jets and yachts also collects artifacts from dictators. And he has, for example, a signed copy of Mein Kampf.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned about earlier at the beginning with Clarence Thomas hanging out guy.
I was saying that my 30 years of writing about Justice Thomas, it kind of makes sense that one of that it's all come down to him being best friends with someone who collects Hitler memorabilia.
Yeah,
I mean,
it makes sense. In the end, it makes sense.
Did you hear who defended Justice Thomas? Sorry, I forgot to mention.
No,
our friend John Yoo. He had the torture memo.
He's not our friend. I mean, like, for a second, I thought you really were going to say something that we respected.
When John Yoo comes to your defense, you generally should run away.
He's the guy who defended torture.
No, he wrote the torture memo. Co-wrote the torture memo.
He co-wrote the memo that gave the Bush administration what they thought was cover to torture people.
Yes.
Legal cover to torture.
So going back to the thing, I haven't. I mean, if I had President Biden's ear, my answer is easy. I don't even care anymore, Pete, about the Washington judge. I don't. If I were Biden, and this is what I wrote a month ago on Dorfman Law, a while back. If I were Biden, I would go on national television. And this is what I would do. Can I have 5 minutes for this, Pete? This is important.
5 minutes?
3 minutes. It's important. In 1936, when the Supreme Court was stopping the New Deal and people were, jumping out of windows and losing their jobs and Great Depression, and Roosevelt, FDR got the Congress to pass all kinds of New Deal laws to help this emergency, and the Supreme Court kept striking them down, Roosevelt went on national radio and said, we have to save the country from the court. We have to save the Constitution from the court. The court is made up of aged and infirm men, and we have to do something about it. And then he did his court packing plan. That's what happened. And then
that's when he went and tried to pack the court.
Yeah, and then the court changed its mind, and he didn't have to. Okay. I think President Biden should have a national. I mean, this is not in his personality, but maybe, who knows? He wants a second term.
He's not going to do what you're about to suggest, but I hear it. Go ahead.
He should go on national TV and say that we have several lower court judges who have acted in ways that are illegitimate. One of them keeps striking down the Affordable Care Act. The other, and getting reversed. The other one just has struck down a lot of Obama and struck down a lot of Biden policies. But this last one is just simply tortured legal reasoning with no basis. I am not going to follow it.
I'm not going to follow it. What does that mean? Like, I hear everybody saying and asking that question, should President Biden follow this? I heard Republican Nancy Mace from a pro-life Republican in South Carolina say, I do not think Joe Biden should follow this. And I'm sitting here going, how does the president get to decide whether or not he's going to follow a court's ruling? This does not sound like a good precedent.
That's why I wish we did a whole show on this, or maybe we will in the future. When the Constitution was being debated, Pete, bear with me, when the Constitution was being debated in 1788, and Madison and James Madison and John Jay and Alexander Hamilton wanted to convince the people of New York to ratify the Constitution, they wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers. All right. One of the reasons they wrote the Federalist Papers is because a guy with a pen named Brutus had written a bunch of op-eds saying, don't ratify this new Constitution. It's terrible. And there are a lot of reasons why. One of the biggest reasons, he said, was the Supreme Court. He said, you can't give judges a job for life and have them strike down laws. There's no power above them. There's no power below them. They'll be free of all shackles, including those of heaven itself. The word shackles is my word. Heaven itself is his word. Alexander Hamilton responded to that op-ed in Federalist Paper number 78. And what Hamilton said, Pete, famously, was the court has neither purse nor sword. And what Hamilton meant was the court has no military, no police force, no marshals, no anything that they control for their own money. And they had no money. Congress, and that's how Congress was allowed to shut down the court for a year. It didn't give them any money. Hamilton also said that the judiciary has to rely on the executive to enforce its opinions. And if the judiciary gets too far away from what the executive and the people want, then the executive has the option of not enforcing the orders.
Okay.
And that's what I didn't use those exact words. But that's
wow.
So now people will say, all right, Segall, but wait a minute. I got this response today from a law professor about that piece. What about 1958 when the governor of Arkansas said, I'm not going to desegregate my schools because I was not a party to the Brown decision and I don't have to follow the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court unanimously said, yes, you do have to follow us because we are the ultimate law of the land. And President Eisenhower, to his credit, sent in the National Guard to enforce the decision. And that's how the system is supposed to work. If the president agrees with it, he should enforce it. In fact, even if he disagrees with it, he should enforce it if he thinks it's legitimate. These judges are not acting legitimately, Pete. They are not. They are doing things that are illegitimate. And the president has no constitutional obligation to enforce illegitimate judicial opinions.
Oh, wow.
And by the way,
that is
Alexander Hamilton, if you don't believe me.
No, I believe that is fascinating. That was really interesting to learn. I was really enlightened by that. Because you listen to the Sunday shows and it's like, should Biden enforce it? I'm like, who the hell gets to decide? But there you go. Wow. Okay. So thank you very much for that. Now, finally, we do have to.
By the way, the House of Representatives would impeach Biden for doing that. But so what?
Oh, they will?
Of course they would. Of course they would. They didn't impeach Biden for jaywalking. You know that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I hear you. All right, final one. Ready?
Yeah.
New York Times. A federal judge in Texas who once declared the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional issued a far-reaching ruling on Thursday that prevents the Biden administration from enforcing a provision of the law that provides patients with certain types of free preventative care, including screenings for cancer, depression, diabetes, and HIV. The decision by Judge Reed O'Connor of the Federal District Court for the North District of Texas applies nationwide, and if it stands, it could have far-reaching implications for millions of Americans, bringing the United States back to the days before the 2010 health law known as Obamacare, where insurers were free to decide which preventative services they could cover. This, my friend, is a big FD, and the plaintiff, of course, is a conservative business owner, Houston doctor who has challenged the Affordable Care Act several times, named Dr. Stephen Hotze, Braidwood Management v. Who is it? The name of this case, if anybody wants to look more into it. This is a big deal. Go ahead.
It would be a big deal. Well, so here's what's likely to, well, okay. The case has no plausibility. It's not a case reasonable people can disagree about. Reed O'Connor voted to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act, the whole thing, everything, hook, line, and sinker, just 3 or 4 years ago. He was reversed by the Supreme Court. It was the case, well, the court found the parties had no standing, but we knew the parties had no standing from the beginning. So that's what he should have done. I believe he struck down a transgender policy issued by the Obama administration. I believe he did that. They forum shopped for this particular judge.
They forum shopped. They got themselves a little Reed O'Connor. They knew what they were getting.
So, but here's what I'm a little nervous about. On a 5-4 Supreme Court with Justice Roberts being, kind of a swing vote, I think this case is not a problem at all and goes right back.
Oh, good.
But remember, there are 5 people to the right of Justice Thomas. Remember, it was Justice Roberts.
Right.
Justice Roberts. And remember, it was Justice Roberts who saved Obamacare the first.
That's right.
So I'm not nervous, but I'm a little bit anxious about this decision. But it's part of a bigger problem, Pete. And again, I think even if the Supreme Court were to take this legal reasoning and overturn all the preventive medicine provisions of the ACA, I think Biden should say, I'm not going to do it. Tough.
Biden should also not enforce this one.
Correct.
I mean, millions of people their health would be directly affected imminently.
And that's imminently and in the future, because it's preventive.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes I've been talking to you for years about the Supreme Court, and so many of the cases don't directly affect me.
Right.
And this is just a case that would directly affect so many people it's not a gender thing. It's not a race thing. It's not an age thing. It's a health thing. And it's a hugely important development that legislators were able to change this law to prevent insurance companies from doing this. For courts to reverse that, for this guy to reverse that, it would so directly affect people of all backgrounds, walks of life, socioeconomics, you name it, even including wealthy people. Your policy can be denied as well. Your claim can be denied as well.
I'm going to go back to Reed O'Connor. The last time he had an Affordable Care Act case, he struck the whole law down. And people went in two. There were two people, both Fellow Society members, Jonathan Adler and Ilyas Soman, who, since the second the Affordable Care Act was passed, made arguments to get it struck down. Big litigation, strike it down, get rid of it. They're both libertarians, and they're both friends of mine. And no, because I mean we disagree on stuff, but I think they're you can reasonably disagree on stuff. But anyway, they both said that they both wrote in Reason magazine, which is part of the Vala conspiracy, or the other way around. They both, on the last case, said the Supreme Court should dismiss this. There's no standing. It's frivolous. It's stupid. Get rid of it. And they want the Affordable Care Act struck. They want it gone. They both want it gone out of our lives. That's who this judge is. So my point is this, Pete. 2 points.
So one crazy. It's so craven what that would mean for people.
One is, I'm not suggesting the president should ever not enforce a decision that he thinks is reasonable or plausible, even if he disagrees with it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is where the decision is so illegitimate, where it is so off into crazy land, where there's no legitimate legal argument, and the and's a big one, it affects the lives of millions or tens of millions of Americans, then I think the president has the authority to say, you've made your decision. I'm making mine.
Okay.
And by the way, Abraham Lincoln kind of said that in some ways. Different time. Civil War is different situation. But I mean, it was Hamilton's response.
It just is. It's scary to think that then Trump would be able to do that.
That's what people are saying. And my answer is, I think at this point, given not at this point, meaning because we have 6 conservative justices, I mean at this point where we have 200 years of history, where the court stopped Congress from ending slavery in the territories, where the court stopped Congress from ending desegregation in 1870s, when the court struck down 200 laws between 1900 and 1936 involving labor safety and worker safety and minimum wages and overtime, when the court has destroyed our political processes through gutting the Voting Rights Act and through political campaign finance decisions that are simply absurd and crazy, except for Citizens United, which is actually correct. Every other case is wrong. The history of them, has the court done some? And if you believe that fetuses are living human beings, they would put Roe and Casey in there too. Obviously,
they put Roe and Casey what?
In the same group as everybody on the cases I just mentioned. Oh, and Shelby County too. Of course. I mean, the court has just done so much harm that I'm willing to live in a world where the court is basically what's the politically? I was going to use the politically incorrect word. I don't think it's incorrect in this context, where the court is just crippled. I'm willing to live in that world. I think it's a better world.
The court is what?
Crippled.
Cutting out a little bit. Sorry.
Crippled.
I got it. How about this one? Brian Hughes just emailed me this, listener.
By the way, is that a politically incorrect word? It might be. So I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, cripple, I think probably.
But not in this sense.
Not in this sense.
LeBron James couldn't play, so the Lakers were crippled. Seems okay.
Well, that's a little borderline because you're talking about
LeBron James had to go to a wedding, so he couldn't play.
Is that right?
No, I'm just saying, would that be politically incorrect? I'm asking a question.
A court being crippled, a company being crippled, an organization being crippled. I think that's all right. We'll find out. Texas County to consider shutting...
I don't want to find out. Don't tell me.
I'll ask my friends at the ADA. Texas County to consider shutting down library after judge orders books with LGBTQ and racial content returned to shelves. So the judge ordered that you got to put these books back on the shelves, and now the Texas County is talking about shutting down the library. That's not really a legal thing, I guess, but I just saw that.
Well, what's happening in Texas, Florida, and some other states out in the Midwest and towards the West, this is one of the ways Trump broke our country. Pete, not next show, but maybe the show after that, I want to do a show with you, and maybe we can get a debate going on. Two liberals talking. I used to believe Trump was 70% symptom, 30% cause.
Right.
Maybe 80% symptom.
Yeah, that's fair.
No, I don't think so. I think
not anymore. No, I see where you're going. Go ahead.
I think Trump is actually 90% cause. And
I do too.
We're back to book banning, and we're back to women being third-class citizens, and we're back to LGBTQ people's rights being as limited as much as
there's
possible.
Just no. I fully agree with you, because there's nobody else in America or the world that has zero shame about.
No, I think Ted Cruz does, but he doesn't have the same.
Not on race and gender. He doesn't. He doesn't talk about people the way that Donald Trump does, thus giving permission for millions of other Americans to behave that way. Ted Cruz doesn't really do that.
Fair.
Yeah.
By the way, it's 90%.
He's just a run-of-the-mill asshole, and it's hard to understand why anybody, including his own family, would like him. But that's like
a lot of people.
Yeah, he's a fake. He's a phony. He's got no integrity. All that, he's hollow. But there's a lot of people. Mike Pence is like that. But
I think the big difference is Trump is
classless.
Well, all those things. But what's it called when you But he also is a savant in some ways in knowing how to reach a lot of people's worst quality. No, wait, let me finish. He knows how to get people to act as badly as possible.
Yeah,
and that's a rare quality.
I don't know. It's not a rare quality and I'm being serious. It's not a rare quality in the lower rungs of society. It's not a rare quality to be able to manipulate people in organized crime or petty crime gangs or in jail. Like it's harder to do that to more sophisticated, more educated people, I think, and he's been able to.
But he's right. That's my point. Is that it is still inconceivable to me every day that the Republican Party has a chairperson. There's someone somewhere who's a chairperson. Michael Steele used to be that guy. I used to debate him on Rick the Younger Steele show all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I like Michael Steele. He was a great guy. But somewhere, someplace, there is a leader of the Republican Party. And that leader should come out and say, we hereby disavow Donald Trump. Our party disavows Donald Trump.
And that leader would immediately be self-immolating his political career.
I don't think so. There would be 6 months of chaos and badness, but at the end of the day, but my only point is,
Full disagree with you.
How do we get to the point where there's a whole political party who's not willing to do that?
Oh, I think when Donald Trump dies, praise be the prophet, when he dies, the cult won't. They will think he's coming back. They'll think he's still alive. Like it'll be like, oh God, the ding dong, the witch is dead, and they'll be like, he's not dead, because they live on Earth too.
They won't believe he's dead. They'll believe he's somewhere finding some other thing.
Yeah, they'll just all the Trump impersonators will start grifting and be like, I'm right here, still alive.
I want to leave. Thank you for having me on. I want to leave this though by circling back.
Okay, circle back, please.
Yes, I've studied a lot of. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was an American hero when it comes to litigating for women's rights, American hero, not debatable. I don't think conservatives debate. When she got on the Supreme Court, she voted liberal 99.9% of the time in cases that matter. I've always criticized her for that. It can't be the Constitution means 99.9% of the time what Justice Ginsburg wants it to be. That doesn't make any sense. And at the end of her career, she said publicly things about Donald Trump she shouldn't have said when he was running for president. And at the end of her career, it appears she might have had a relationship with Nina Totenberg that may not have been so great. So I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. But here's the difference between Justice Ginsburg and Justice Thomas, and even maybe even other justices on the right and Justice Thomas. Here's the difference. For whatever reasons, and I feel bad for the guy who grew up in poverty in the segregated South, he is Trumpian in his ability to lie and deceive. And that's the one thing we should not tolerate ever on the Supreme Court of the United States. And I never said that before on your show. I've never called Justice Thomas Trumpian.
Yeah.
But I've been reviewing all the past. And there are too many things. There's too many things. There's a constant pattern. And I'm not even talking about the 3 women who accused him of sexual harassment. I'm not even talking about that. Leave that out of it. Not reporting her income, lying during his testimony, all these trips, going to the Koch brothers. It's just a constant pattern of deception and lying. And I don't think we should say, well, we're not going to say that because he's a Supreme Court justice. I criticized Ginsburg for what she said about Donald Trump during the election. I think it was terrible. And I think she probably would have had to have recused herself in any case involving Donald Trump directly and the election. If it came up in 2020, she was dead by then. He needs to go away. He needs to resign. He needs to be off the Supreme Court. He is a liar, a serial liar, and a serial grifter. And he needs to go.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Segall, late on a Monday. I can't thank you enough for joining me. We've all gotten more enlightened and educated as a result of this conversation. As always, thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, there you go. Eric Segall here on Stand Up, and that is all I've got for you today. Wanted to make sure I got this out, though. Tomorrow it's Tim Wise, and the rest of the week I've got some great new guests. I cannot do any of it without your subscription, so please consider one right now. Tell your friends about the show and give it a review on Spotify and Apple, iTunes, podcasts, and wherever else that you listen to. Thank you very much for your support, for thinking, for listening, rather, and for thinking. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I love you. Bye-bye.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.